Welcome back. Joining us to dive deeper into our top story, the crisis in Gaza and surrounds, is Sara Yael Hirschorn. She's a historian and political analyst. Sara, thanks so much for joining us. So given this unfolding crisis, worsening by the hour, what are Israel's priorities right now?
Well, I think Israel's top priorities is trying to determine what the steps are going forward. Yesterday's priority was to continue to secure southern communities that have been infiltrated by Hamas militants, or perhaps we should better call them terrorists, who had invaded residential communities in southern Israel, and also to stop the rocket fire, which is also perhaps opening a new front in the last several hours with Lebanon. I think Israel's security leaders now need to make an assessment about the ability to liberate captives who were taken into Gaza, now standing at about 100 civilian Israelis taken from southern communities, and what would be needed to do so, including a possible ground invasion to secure the Gaza Strip while those extraction operations may be pursued.
So is there a real danger that this conflict will spread into the West Bank and Lebanon? And what about the possible threat of attacks from Hezbollah? What are the options if that happens?
Well, as of this hour, the West Bank has been rather quiet, but of course things can change in a moment. As we know, the summer in the West Bank was very heated, with repeated incursions by the IDF into West Bank towns and cities to try to root out Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorist cells, as well as settler terrorist attacks on the village of Huara and corresponding attacks by Palestinian militants on Israeli civilians on the roads in the West Bank. So it's very hard to say whether the West Bank could become a second front of the war. There had also been some small shelling on the Sheba farm region in the border of Israel and Lebanon in the late hours of last night. That seems to have calmed down for now, but there is a great deal of suspicion that Hezbollah, another Iranian-backed proxy like Hamas, may want to enter this war, bringing Israel into a larger regional conflict.
Well, that takes me to my next question. Is there a concern that, given that Iran is supported by Hamas and the US is the closest ally of Israel, that we are looking at a conflict that could spread to a much bigger scale?
I think we are certainly looking at a proxy war in the Middle East, but I doubt that there will be any kind of direct confrontation between the United States and Iran, or perhaps even Israel and Iran. It seems that Iran would like to work through its mediaries, namely Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and Hezbollah for the moment. But I think that they would like to keep themselves out of the conflict or remain in the shadows.
What about the situation for Palestinian civilians caught up in this conflict between Hamas and Israel, especially given that their living conditions were already so difficult? How many Palestinians are at risk now, and how will international aid agencies be able to cope with all of this?
I think we're looking at some very difficult and dark days ahead. Of course, Gaza is not a democracy, so we don't know how many Palestinians in Gaza supported Hamas's most recent offensive, but certainly they will suffer any price of Israeli retaliations from aerial bombings and any possible ground invasion. I think the humanitarian toll is likely to climb steadily and perhaps very starkly in coming days as these new offensives begin to unroll. And humanitarian agencies already strapped by the dire situation in Gaza, for many years now, will struggle to keep up. Last but not least, Israel has now cut off electricity and gas supplies to Gaza in an attempt to I think, gain leverage over the Strip for any possible new offensive, and this certainly will affect the day-to-day life of average Palestinians in Gaza.
So at this point, is a two-state solution possible now, or did this attack yesterday change all of that?
Well, I think, unfortunately, Hamas may have very well buried the possibility for a two-state solution for yet another generation. It's very hard to see, especially with the unknowns in coming days and perhaps coming weeks ahead, how both Israeli and Palestinian leadership will emerge from this conflict, and whether there will really be any appetite to return to a peace negotiation following what seems like maybe devastating weeks of warfare in the region once again. This unprecedented attack by Hamas, which not only was the barrage of rockets, but the infiltration into Israeli territory, also certainly has scarred Israeli society I think that will certainly harden the hearts of many leaders as well as average citizens toward returning to a negotiation table with Palestinians, though it's very uncertain what will be left of Gaza by the time these new offensives may be over.
What about Netanyahu? How has his return to power fueled tensions between the two sides, especially given the uprisings of late?
Well, I spent the spring and summer in Jerusalem watching the country really become torn apart by the most religious and right-wing coalition in Israeli history, pushing forward a judicial reform program, expansion of West Bank settlements, and other domestic issues that certainly rocked Israeli society long before these activities happened. And while Netanyahu today is assuming his position as Mr. Security, certainly he will be called to account for this grave intelligence failure that allowed these activities to come about. There have been rumors that Netanyahu is now willing to bring some other members of government into a national unity government in an emergency situation, which may ultimately be a better outcome for the ongoing future of the Israeli coalition. But certainly this has come only under duress and after many, many months of Netanyahu and his coalitional partners certainly making the situation in Israel domestically quite untenable.
Sara Yael Hirschorn, thank you so much for your time, historian and political analyst.